Hi, True Nature Medicine Tribe. It is Sarah Jane, a very tired Sarah Jane. I have been living on about 2 or 3 hours sleep, and according to my Fitbit, my sort of average time awake during the night is between 40 and 60 times, which is no surprise because I've had a lot of my mind. I've been fully immersed in my own process of unraveling and looking into the shadow time, and also wondering, and here's a little question that I'm going to throw out to you right now is, we're in the Virgo moon. It's about making the hidden conscious and looking at where we're not fully stepping into our truths and how we can change that. So I want you to just write in the comments below, if you're on this, is where were you and what was going on in your life in 1997? Because this is the time that we're really being invited again, and this is showing up as chaos in my own life and most of my clients' lives right now, is this theme of unraveling, of going back into those old patterns, into the shadows, into the blind spots where we think we're progressing, where we think we're getting more into our skins and loving it, and yet there's this underlying theme which I've seen reoccurring in a big way in my own life now, where those narcissistic tendencies of being under the narcissist have really been showing up in that I'm still not speaking my own truth. I am making things like other people's words, other people's capacities and talents, and including money, okay, because we have to put money into that, where I'm making all of that more meaningful and more valuable than what I came here to do, and that even though I'm stepping out and I'm being more vulnerable, there's still this sense of that I'm doing what I'm doing out of choice, even though I'm in choice. And I want to give a really big shout out and a big love to my private mentor, Hilary Schneider. She's just been amazing in reminding me where I'm being out of alignment with my heart's calling, with the purpose, with my own personal medicine of what I came here to share with you and in the world, and how easy it is to slip into those old patterns of doing what everyone else is doing and trying to put on these masks and show up in a way that is so the spiritual divorce. It's so far out of what we came here to do that it exacerbates the shadows, and that's why I'm so excited to be starting the shadow dancing course, where we really look at perfectionism, where we look at how we're cutting up and divorcing parts and pieces of ourselves and avoiding the truth of who we came here to be, because we still are functioning from this place of not enough. And that most of the time, and this is in full transparency, most of the time what I show up and speak of is my own internal struggle. It's my own shadow work that I'm doing. And I really recognized with Hilary's support that we're way more connected than we give ourselves credit for, that my story is your story, and that the common thread is that we're all suffering in the stories of our not enoughness, that we're not showing up fully expressed, we're not living the unbridled life, and it's time to change all of that. And that kind of is the lead into what I wanted to speak about today. And forgive me if I am tired, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's like being drunk, because when we're inebriated, we let go of the censors, right? We let go of the filters, and we just show up and we just say it like it is. And the story I spoke about the other day that I keep saying I'm going to complete was that story about the swan and the scorpion, where there was a swan, if you don't know it, at the edge of a river, and a scorpion approached the swan asking if she would give him a ride to the other side of the river bank on her back. And the swan said, no, you're a scorpion. You'll sting me and I'll die. And the scorpion assured the swan that he would never do that. All he wanted was for her to take him from the one side of the river to the other. So he was pretty convincing, and the swan gave in and allowed the scorpion to climb upon her back in her most vulnerable state of being in the grace of being a swan. And she paddled and she got him to the other side, and just before reaching the shore, the scorpion stung her. And he jumped off to safety and carried on with his life. And as the swan was sinking, slowly dying from the poisons that she asked the scorpion why he broke his promise and stung her. And the scorpion said, I'm a scorpion and that's what I do. And I love that story because it reminds me of the places where being human is that even though we know what we are, we try to deny and hide and divorce and mutilate and amputate and turn a blind eye to what is intrinsically our true nature, rather than looking at the capacities that we have where we're making ourselves wrong as the very thing that keeps us being who we are. And I had a client, Marie, who asked me, why I believe that the swan allowed the scorpion on her back. And I just said in the moment that it was because she was denying her instincts. She was denying her true nature. And when I kind of look at that as the swan projecting her swan-like qualities upon the scorpion, and I love the word projection, and I'm really going to get into this in a deeper way in the shadow dancing class that starts on the 8th, as above as below, the infinity sign, in the month of completion of where we feel unsafe, where we feel that it's not safe to actually speak our truth and be vulnerable and raw enough to actually let people see who we truly are, for fear of rejection. Right? Our deepest fear is that of being separate, of feeling like we don't matter, that we don't play our part. And this is something I know really, really well. And that's where we come to understand narcissism, where we find that narcissists are masters at projection, and that we have to own the part of us that is narcissistic in its tendencies as well, in order to walk the spiral path and actually know that as much as we are victim or perpetrator or observer, we're moving between all of these energies all the time, and that it's the dark qualities within ourselves that we project onto those that we love. And we don't often think about our own projections. We just as easily project our goodness upon the narcissist in our lives, and then we fall in love with the good qualities in ourselves that we're projecting upon the others. And you might see the narcissist or the scorpion as someone who is empathetic, that is caring, that is loving and concerned and compassionate and honoring and in allowance and above all honest too, because this is who we are truly when we are being in our true nature. And it's really, I find it really difficult and really challenging. I'm feeling quite pained by my own tendencies towards turning the narcissist inward and really destroying everything that I am, and wanting to not be the champion of my own reality and be my greatest cheerleader. And Hillary Schneider really did that for me in my last private session with her, was say, you know what, how can you show up as the projection of all the parts that you don't like, that actually inspires people to realize that they can change what they've bought as true that's actually a lie. And you get accused of being the very thing you eventually come to see in the scorpion all the time. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And I remember being accused of being selfish and greedy and uncommitted and angry and bipolar, God forbid, and a host of other things that left me really questioning whether or not this was really who I was, you know, whether this was the truth of who I was in my relationship with my ex-husband. And the most difficult thing was that he really seemed to believe it. He believed that, oopsie, my battery says it's low, so I might lose you, but I'll catch up on this if the battery dies. But, you know, my ex-husband really believed that he was the pure one, and that I was the one poisoning his reality with my impurities and my toxic thoughts and my truth telling, that it was all a lie, you know, and in his words, he used to say to me, here's a gun, go shoot yourself. But once the veil was lifted after my breakdown, and after I kind of lost everything that I knew as my life and my reason for being, I could really start to see through the narcissistic web of illusion. I could see that who he accused me of being was never the truth about me. And one thing I notice with many of my clients is that they just can't believe the narcissist in their lives was capable of doing the things that he or she said or did. And turning that inwards, where we are actually being our biggest saboteur, our biggest trickster, our biggest prankster, our biggest narcissist, is that we don't actually need the ex-husband or the wicked stepmother to show us the parts of ourselves that we don't like. And, you know, it's so out of character for the person they believed him or her to be, but we begin to believe that we are unbelievable, because it's that chronic, unpredictable, toxic stress. For me, it was years and years and years of that sort of insidious, subtle abuse that I actually gave up. I didn't even have an identity of myself, because I believed his compelling argument that I wasn't worth the space that I was taking up. And the ending of relationship for me in that instance, and in many instances where I have let go of relationships eventually, right? I always say I'm cute, not bright, is almost always traumatic, because the swan, or the light, remember, learns that she has been deceived. And we are our biggest tricksters. We are the deception catalysts of our own reality all the time. And in that story of the swan and the scorpion, she really trusted the scorpion, that narcissist, and believed in him, that a leopard can change his spots, that you know, that we intrinsically are capable of being the greatness that we came in here to be. And I don't know, you know, it's the shock, right? It's the disappointment or the naivety that his sudden change in behavior was possible. That it's a really compelling argument. And this is where the monkey mind, the shadow parts, the inner demons, they are toxic. Absolutely, Carl. But, you know, she was shocked, the swan, that he has no feeling about her sinking and drowning, and just hops off as if nothing ever happened. You know, it's the people in our lives, especially family, and this is that ancestral trauma where family just kind of, I'm exploding, I'm gonna spew my vomit and my bile and all my judgments about you on you, and I feel great. And then we've got to sweep it under the carpet and pretend it never ever happened, and that you have to love me. There's an avoidance in there, in that projection. So in the swan's case, she's really shocked that he has absolutely no feeling about her dying and sinking and drowning, and just hops off as if nothing ever happened. And she's the one that gave him her life. And she believes, as we all do, that when he says he would never sting her, we want to intrinsically see the good parts in ourselves that we despise, but also the parts in people that they don't believe that they're intrinsically good inside, right? Because we're always afraid of going into the shadows, to have the cynicism or the skepticism that, based on my past story, based on my life experience, that hasn't always been the case. You know, that people always validate our truth, our reality, that we can't change. You know, there's a deceptor in there. And now, you know, after believing that the scorpion wouldn't sting her, he does anyway. And then he laughs in the face of her pain and disbelief and says, "Oh, you're so stupid, you know, you stupid swan." And he just hops off. And I can always count on their goodness to get what I want. So if I were to imagine the rest of the story, I would say the swan sunk down to the bottom of the river, only to find the bodies of all those other beautiful swans that came before her. And she was not the first, and she certainly won't be the last, just as you are not wrong to want to believe that humanity is good, that there is a beauty and a grace and an allowance in being human. And because it's the nature of the scorpion to sting, the swan could clearly see that the scorpion was a scorpion. You know, he wasn't wearing a disguise like we often put masks on and pretend to be something that we're not and give ourselves up in order to fit in and in order to not make waves, in order to not be rejected and cast out by the tribe. That primal instinct to belong is very much running our lives. It certainly runs mine a lot of the time. That is the suffering in the story, that you see people do bad things. You know, why do bad things happen to good people? It's all the whys that we're constantly navigating our way through to try and find our place of peace and truth and vulnerability in the rawness of proving, right, the visible proof that I actually intrinsically am a good person, but I don't believe that I am, right? We're always trying to find a way to validate that we're worthy of love, that we're worthy of receiving, that we're worthy of, that what I choose to be in every moment is a contribution to myself and to other people. And, you know, in this myth, that scorpion, he didn't pretend to be anything else, except he did make a promise that he wouldn't hurt the swan. And the problem we often run into is that narcissists, and I'm calling this inward to myself as I speak, are not so blatantly obvious. You know, when they arrive at the riverbank asking for a ride, we see Prince Charming. We see the fantasies and insanities and assigns and assignations of, oh, woe, you know, help the fair maiden in distress. And we're waiting for this beautiful prince on a white horse to come in and rescue us. And yet often within the first couple of months or even the first couple of dates, we might actually see something very scorpion-like about the new love interests in our lives. And it's interesting because, you know, this is where we beat ourselves up. I certainly did, because from the very get-go of meeting my then to be husband, there was always the red flags. There was always this part of me that said, stay away, the scorpion's going to sting you. But there was this very dark side. There was this shadow side of wondering if I was resilient or courageous or actually stupid enough to prove myself wrong. Because I could see that underneath all the pain, underneath all the trauma, he was just trying to find his way. And he was doing the best that he could, but he was still a scorpion. And, you know, this is where my suggestion that the swan was denying her own instincts was very accurate. I see that, you know, I see the ugly duckling in me. And it's funny because my mother used to have a swimming school. She taught like 3 generations of people in the town that I lived in that to swim. And she always put on this little show at the end of the season, and she played the swan, and she made this beautiful swan. I still remember it, made out of chicken wire and plastic, and she'd get underneath the swan and she would swim. And I was always the ugly duckling, and I always used to hate that why couldn't I be the swan? I was always the ugly duckling in the play. And that projection of playing the part in that little swimming school end of year thing somehow imprinted on me that I couldn't see the swan in me, right? That there was something despicable and just so sad and desperate about that part of me that thought that I would always be the ugly duckling. And it's the deeper part, right? You know, we may have a knowing and then not trust it, but there's a deeper part in when we paint over our instincts, when we turn into the blindness, we pretend and avoid and think that I'm not going to look at that because it's so awful, of our swan-like qualities. And instead of listening to that voice of intuition, we see in perhaps the new love interest or the new possibilities of creating community and connection, whether that's in your business or in your family or your relationship to money, or birthing new ideas into the world, that lies very deeply buried within our own psyche, within our own being. And we are caring creatures, and you know, we wouldn't probably never hurt a fly. So how would it be possible that this amazing new person or this new opportunity in our life could ever conceive of hurting us? Because we do care. We don't want to create destruction and separation and hurt and blame and shame and regret. And I remember when my ex and I were sort of breaking up, you know, he failed to deposit his part of the mortgage into the bank account as he always did. And now, you know, this was his house too, and I was the one that was trying to keep things living. I was trying to breathe life into something that was dead already, because the banks had already claimed it. We'd already been locked out of our factory. We'd already been put into the sequestration process, and I was in total breakdown of, you know, how could this have even happened? Because there was a part there that I was like, how could you even consider that if I was to leave you, or to leave the relationship, or to leave the business that was no longer bringing me joy, that you would have to destroy it? I mean, he used to say to me, the only way that you're going to leave this relationship, the only way that you're going to leave me or leave this business is in a box. I began to believe it, and I never conceived that he would be capable of putting me in financial jeopardy. And right then, you know, it was still we. He never told me he was snorting cocaine up his nose and using the money that I was desperately trying to bring in to save our business. We don't have a Chapter 9 in our liquidation process in South Africa. We could have traded out of that position that we were in when our clients in another country had reneged on their payment. And it all happened so quickly. But in my mind, I couldn't see how he could do such a thing. You know, he had been very responsible for years, but now, because the relationship with our business, the relationship with our life was literally falling apart, he suddenly became even more irresponsible. And maybe he'd been irresponsible from the beginning, but I'd always kind of been the swan, giving him a ride from the wrong side of the railway tracks, of seeing that he was more than he was willing to give himself credit for. He was brilliant at his trade, but you know, he'd come through a bush war. He had killed people. He'd seen his best friend got blown up in a landmine, and he actually was in post-traumatic stress disorder, and nobody was ever there, because he didn't talk about it, to give him a place of safety for himself. And I believe that even though we were having problems and everything had to be destroyed, he still had goodness in him. And you know, he was beyond being considerate, right? He'd lost himself in the drugs, in the drinking, in the company that he was keeping. But I couldn't get an answer as to why he stung me and why he'd sting himself. You know, we were still living together. We were living in a house, but we were totally dying in the toxicity of what was happening. And I really found myself in that place where I I did break down, where I did reach out to friends that he'd actually locked out of my house. The one day my friend actually climbed up a ladder to get into my house to come and find me, because I was in the fetal position in a cupboard, wishing that I was dead already, with my leg in plaster. He'd locked me in the house, and he had made really, really sure that my support systems went away. But, you know, the failure of that, the failure of how could I have let everything that I built disappear like that, and how had I not seen it coming, was a really hard pill to swallow. And up until that point, I really still was believing that he was a sensible person, you know. But the truth was, I was never a sensible person. I would have never done that to him. So I projected this quality onto him in his narcissistic mind, that he was punishing me for ending the relationship that had already ended. You know, there was nothing left. There was no house, there was no money, there was no cars. Everything had gone. The money had gone. And even when I sat in the depth of my spiritual breakthrough, or my spiritual breakdown, when I booked myself into a mental institution in Durban called Townhill, he never contacted me. He never phoned, you know, and this is after 15 years of being together. His family never asked how I was doing. And even on the other side of that, when I came out, he still came to an undisputed divorce hearing to intimidate me. I mean, there was nothing left. And yet he still came and threatened to hurt my family. I had to get a restraining order against him, because the threats in my breakdown, in the place where he had total control over me still, because of all these years of narcissistic abuse and wearing me down, he came to the court to intimidate me, you know, and the judge thought it was hysterical. And then he wanted my wedding ring, which I'd actually paid for myself, just because he could, just because that was the hook and that was the way. And, you know, he left me having to pay for the judge's amusement for months after that. After I got the divorce, you know, he was totally beyond remorse and still playing his mind games, any which way he could, threatening to hurt my family. I was staying with my sister at the time, telling me he was going to send my beloved cats to me dead in a box. You know, and I still thank God every day that I got them back safely months later, when I thought I would never see them again. So, you know, like the scorpion, he stung me over and over again. And when my usefulness had been served, he went on to torment other women in their moments of weakness. And it was interesting how that kind of came up, from people contacting my mother to say, you know, what happened, because this man has my daughter prisoner in her own life with her child, and totally screwing with her own mentality and her own knowing of who she was. And anyway, I'm here to live through it and tell you the story. But what I know is that narcissistic people, they have absolutely no issue with breaking agreements and manipulating so subtly that you believe what they're actually saying is true. I mean, they're so convincing, and my ex-husband was definitely a master at that. And it's in their nature. Okay, my battery says it's really going to close down. But it's in their nature to exploit people for their own advantage. And with our swan-like nature, it's difficult to comprehend such a reality. You know, how could someone be so cold and heartless? How could someone suddenly care so little when he appeared to care so much in the beginning? Even though we hear the red flags, we go there because intrinsically we want people to care about us. And I certainly have done that many, many times in my love life, in my relationships. But, you know, what is it just so he could get what he wanted? You know, what is that? You know, a way to get to the other side of the river? And my life, is it so invaluable to him and so expendable? You know, and how could that be? These are questions I ask myself still to this day, now that I have created enough safety to be able to get the anger to a part where the rage isn't the part that shuts me down and puts me back in free state.